He hits send on the third apology of the night, and he doesn't even know what he's apologizing for. His knuckles are pale against the steering wheel. Rain smears the parking lot lights into halos through the windshield, and somewhere underneath the words "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it" is a grown man still begging for permission to exist. He checks his phone every 4 seconds. He rehearses her reply before she's even read the message. He drafts a fourth text, deletes it, drafts it again. This is not love. This is not kindness. This is a hostage negotiation, and he is negotiating for his own worth, offering piece after piece of it, just to hear the phone buzz back with something that sounds like forgiveness. Every man watching this has sat in that car. Every man watching this has sent that text. And most of them will die there, circling the same parking lot for 40 years, mistaking their captivity for a personality, calling it loyalty, calling it being a good guy, calling it anything except what it actually is. But 500 years ago, a Florentine exile, with nothing left to lose, wrote the manual for walking out of that car and never looking back. Niccolò Machiavelli did not write for men who needed to be liked. He wrote for men who needed to survive, stripped of his title, watching from the outside as lesser men who understood power ruled over better men who only understood virtue. And buried in the cold architecture of his work is the exact law that would set that man free if he ever had the stomach to read it. The law is simple, and it is brutal. A man who needs the world's approval to feel whole has already surrendered his kingdom before the first shot is fired. He is not a man. He is a hostage wearing a man's clothes, and his captors don't even have to guard him, because he volunteers for the cell every morning. Sovereignty is not given to you by a boss who finally notices your effort, or a woman who finally texts back, or a room that finally laughs at your joke. Sovereignty is built in the exact moment you stop waiting for any of it. This is the story of what it costs to build that, and why almost no man alive is willing to pay the price. Machiavelli's entire philosophy rests on a single unforgivable observation. Most people, given the choice between comfort and truth, choose comfort every time. The modern man has been trained from birth to chase a specific kind of comfort, the comfort of being understood, of being liked, of never being the villain in anyone's story. He has been sold the idea that his feelings are sacred instructions that must be obeyed the instant they arrive. Feel guilty, apologize immediately. Feel anxious, retreat immediately. Feel disliked, change yourself immediately. This is not emotional intelligence. This is a nervous system running someone else's software. And every notification is a new line of code being installed without his consent. The first demolition, then, is this. Your emotions are not commands. They are information, nothing more, arriving from a body that evolved to survive tigers, not to negotiate group chats. When guilt rises in your chest because you told a friend no, that guilt is not proof you did something wrong. It is simply data, the echo of a childhood where disappointing someone meant losing their protection. Picture two men receiving the exact same angry text from a business partner. The first man's chest tightens, and within 90 seconds he has typed 3 paragraphs of justification, apologized twice, and quietly agreed to a deal that costs him money. The second man feels the exact same tightness in his chest. He notices it, he names it, and then he sets the phone down and finishes his coffee before responding. Same emotion, 2 entirely different men. The indomitable man learns to read that signal the way a pilot reads a warning light, acknowledged, logged, and never allowed to seize the controls. He feels the fear before a hard conversation and has it anyway. He feels the anxiety of an unanswered message and does not chase it. This is not the absence of emotion. This is the demotion of emotion from king to advisor. A man who obeys every feeling that passes through him is not free. He is the most predictable creature alive, and predictability, in the architecture of power, is a leash with no visible owner. Once a man stops being ruled by his own feelings, the second demolition becomes possible, and it is the one that costs him the most friends. He must trade his niceness for something far more dangerous: ruthless honesty. Understand the distinction, because the world will blur it on purpose. Niceness is not goodness. Niceness is a toll you pay so that people will not think poorly of you. It is agreement purchased with silence. The man who never says the hard thing, who softens every truth until it disappears, who becomes the human shock absorber for everyone else's bad decisions, is not kind. He is terrified. He has confused being liked with being good. And in that confusion, he has built his entire identity on a foundation that anyone can withdraw at will, one disapproving look at a time. Machiavelli watched princes destroy their own kingdoms, trying to please everyone, and he wrote, with the cold clarity of a surgeon, that a ruler who tries to be good in all things among men who are not good will come to ruin. The same law governs your living room, your office, your group chat. Every time you nod along with something you don't believe because disagreement feels dangerous, you are not keeping the peace. You are paying interest on a debt that compounds. The friend who never hears the truth from you never grows. The employee who never hears the real reason he's failing never improves, and blames you later for never warning him. The partner who never hears your actual boundary never learns where it is, and so she keeps walking past it, and you keep quietly resenting her for a crime you never told her she was committing. Ruthless honesty is not cruelty. Cruelty enjoys the wound. Ruthless honesty simply refuses to lie for comfort's sake. Say the number that will disappoint them. Say the deadline you will actually hold. Say the sentence that ends the meeting instead of extending it by another false week of politeness. The moment you do this consistently, something strange happens. The room stops testing you because it has finally learned where the wall is, and the people worth keeping around start trusting you more, not less, because they finally know your yes means something. Picture the man who finally does this at work. For 3 years, he has been the one who says yes to every deadline, every extra project, every favor for a manager who has never once returned the favor. He drafts an email one afternoon that simply states the deadline he can actually hit, with no apology attached. No 3 paragraphs of justification, no exclamation points softening the blow. He sends it and closes the laptop before he can watch the reply come in. Nothing collapses. The manager pushes back once, weakly, out of habit, and then accepts it, because the manager was never actually testing the deadline. He was testing whether this particular employee would cave. He didn't. That single email did more for that man standing in that office than 3 years of unpaid overtime ever managed to buy him. That wall is what makes the third demolition survivable, because a man who builds a real wall will inevitably be disliked by someone standing on the other side of it, and he must learn to treat that dislike as a luxury rather than a wound. This is the part of Machiavelli's thinking the modern man finds hardest to swallow. It is safer, he argued, to be feared than loved, because love is held together by a debt of gratitude that men break the instant it becomes inconvenient, while fear is held together by the certainty of consequence. You do not need to be feared by strangers on the internet, but you do need to stop flinching every time someone decides they don't like you. Consider what being universally liked actually requires. It requires you to have no real position on anything that matters, because any real position held long enough will eventually offend someone. The man who is loved by everyone has simply never been tested. He is a mirror, reflecting back whatever the room wants to see, and a mirror has no will of its own. It cannot lead, it can only agree. The sovereign man understands that the moment he draws an actual boundary, states an actual opinion, or holds an actual standard, a portion of the room will resent him for it, and that resentment is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that he finally exists as something more solid than vapor. Watch what happens the first time a man who has spent years agreeing with everyone finally says, calmly, "No, I don't think that's right." The room doesn't collapse. It recalibrates. Some people lean in, surprised, curious about this new edge. A few walk away. And that is not a loss. That is the furniture finally being cleared out of a room that was always too crowded to use. Let them dislike the version of you that says no. Let them dislike the version of you that won't lower the standard to keep the group comfortable. Their disapproval was never a referendum on your worth. It was only ever proof that you had finally taken up space. There is a version of this that shows up smaller and earlier than most men expect, long before it costs them a job or a relationship. It shows up in the group chat when everyone is mocking someone who isn't in the room, and you laugh along because staying quiet feels like siding against the group. It shows up at dinner when your father says something you no longer believe, and you nod because correcting him feels like a betrayal older than the argument itself. Every one of those small surrenders is a rehearsal. You are training your own nervous system to treat disapproval as an emergency, and a nervous system trained that way will eventually fold on something that actually matters, in a moment you cannot afford to fold. The fourth demolition follows naturally from the third, because once you accept being disliked, you must also accept becoming unreadable. And this is where you stop being a target for the manipulators who have been quietly studying you for years. Every manipulator, whether a co-worker, a partner, or a so-called friend, operates the same way a card counter operates a casino. They watch your patterns until they can predict your next move, and then they bet against you. The man who always caves after the third guilt trip has just published his own weakness on a billboard. The man who always explodes when accused unfairly has handed his opponent a remote control disguised as a trigger. Machiavelli understood that survival belongs to the man who can be both fox and lion, cunning enough to see the trap and fierce enough that no one dares set it twice. The bridge between those two is unpredictability, not chaos, not moodiness, strategic opacity. Stop confirming the story people have already written about how you will react. If you are known as the one who always explains yourself, try silence instead, and watch how quickly the room recalibrates. If you are known as the one who always caves, hold the boundary once, without announcement, and watch the manipulator's confidence crack in real time when the script they memorized stops working. You are not becoming dishonest. You are simply refusing to hand your enemies a script written entirely in your own predictable handwriting. This is why the manipulator in your life always seems to know exactly which sentence will make you fold. He has run the experiment before. He knows that if he sighs a certain way, or brings up a certain old mistake, or goes quiet in a certain wounded manner, you will rush to fix his mood like it's your job. The fox in you has to notice the pattern before you can break it. The next time that exact sequence begins, the sigh, the pause, the wounded silence, try simply naming it out loud instead of performing your usual rescue. I notice you go quiet when I say no. Watch the entire choreography stall, because the manipulator was never prepared for a partner who could see the strings. The fifth demolition is the one that separates the men who talk about sovereignty from the men who actually live it. Because it requires action instead of philosophy, you must become willing to walk away from disrespect the first time it happens, not the 15th. Most men treat their tolerance like an infinite resource. They absorb the insult, the broken promise, the crossed boundary, telling themselves that patience is a virtue, when in reality, they are simply too afraid of the silence that follows a real exit. Machiavelli warned that men should be either won over completely or crushed, because minor injuries invite revenge, while devastating ones remove the ability to retaliate at all. Translated into your life, this means the second chance you keep extending to the person who keeps crossing your line is not mercy. It is an invitation, printed and mailed with your own signature. Every time you absorb the disrespect and stay anyway, you are teaching the offender exactly how much they can take from you before you'll finally act, and that number will only grow. Because people don't respect the line you drew, they respect the line you actually enforced. The indomitable man does not need to raise his voice to enforce a boundary. He simply becomes unavailable. No lecture, no dramatic exit speech. Just the quiet, permanent withdrawal of his time, his attention, and his resources from anyone who has proven, through repeated behavior, that they do not deserve them. Your absence, deployed correctly, is louder than any argument you could ever win, and far harder to argue with. Think of the friend who has borrowed money 4 times and paid it back 0. The 5th request always arrives dressed as an emergency, and the old version of you always found the money, because saying no felt like abandoning someone in a crisis of your own making. The sovereign version of you does something almost boring by comparison. He simply says, "I'm not able to do that anymore," and then goes back to his day. No lecture on financial responsibility. No list of the 4 previous times. Just a closed door, calmly shut, with no explanation owed. The friendship that survives that door was never built on the money to begin with. The one that doesn't was never a friendship at all. It was a subscription you finally cancelled. The 6th and final demolition is the one that protects everything you have just built. Because a fortress with an open gate is not a fortress, you must master the mask. This does not mean becoming fake. It means understanding that not every room has earned access to the full architecture of your mind. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must know how to disguise his nature and adapt to the moment, because a prince who reveals every strategy, every weakness, every fear to friend and enemy alike is not transparent. He is defenseless. You do not owe your boss your anxieties. You do not owe every acquaintance your 5-year plan. You do not owe a room full of strangers your open wounds simply because they asked with a sympathetic tone and a practiced pause. Keep your core unshakable and private, and let the mask you show the world shift, depending on what the moment requires. Warm with your allies, unreadable with your rivals, silent with anyone who has not yet earned your truth. This is not manipulation. This is armor. And a man without armor is not being brave. He is simply unprotected in a world that has never once apologized for taking advantage of that. Understand that the mask is not a single face you wear for everyone. It is a wardrobe. The version of you that negotiates a contract does not need to explain his childhood to close the deal. The version of you at your best friend's kitchen table, 3 drinks in, telling the truth about how hard this year has actually been, is not weaker than the version in the boardroom. He is simply operating behind a different, deliberately chosen door. The failure isn't having multiple versions of yourself. The failure is losing track of which door you're supposed to be standing behind, and handing a stranger the key to the room built only for the 4 people who have actually earned it. 6 demolitions. Emotions demoted from command to data. Niceness replaced with honesty. Approval traded for the freedom of being disliked. Predictability broken so no one can script your reactions. Disrespect met with withdrawal instead of negotiation. And your inner world protected behind a mask you control instead of a face you can't stop giving away for free. None of this makes you cold. None of this makes you cruel. The man who walks out of these 6 fires is not isolated. He is finally capable of real connection, because for the first time in his life, the people who stay around him are staying by choice, not because he bribed them with his own submission. He can still love, he can still build, he can still protect the people who matter, fiercely and completely. But he does it from a position of strength instead of a plea for approval, and that single distinction changes the entire trajectory of the life he goes on to build. It changes who he marries. It changes what he tolerates at work. It changes what he'll accept from his own children one day, and what he'll teach them to refuse. The man sitting in that car, sending his 3rd apology of the night, is still in most of you watching this. He is not gone yet, but he does not have to stay there. The moment you stop needing the room to approve of you, before you'll allow yourself to exist in it, you become something the room was never trained to handle. Not cruel, not reckless, just finally, completely your own. Machiavelli did not write his manual so you could rule a kingdom. He wrote it so you could rule the only territory that was ever truly yours, to begin with the one behind your own eyes. None of this happens in a single night. You will slip. You will send the 5th apology text you swore you wouldn't send. You will cave once more to the friend who has never paid you back. And you will hate yourself a little for it in the parking lot afterward. That is not proof the demolition failed. That is proof you are still mid-construction, tearing down 500 years of inherited instinct with nothing but a decision and a Tuesday afternoon. The men who actually finish this transformation are not the ones who never slip. They are the ones who notice the slip faster each time and correct course a little sooner every single week, until one day the correction happens before the apology text is even fully typed. So delete the 4th apology text. Put the phone face down. Sit in that silence for exactly as long as it takes to feel like yourself again. And then start the engine and drive toward the life that was waiting for you the entire time you were busy asking for permission to have it. If any part of this reached the man still sitting in that car, that's exactly who this channel was built for. Go take your territory back.